Hi and welcome back to my channel, 4-Eyed Monster Miniatures, where I'll be sharing stuff on either custom scale model kits I've built and painted myself, or pre-painted scale figures as is, unchanged straight out of the box. Today I'll be looking at the latter again, specifically at another Grandista Nero figure based on the One Piece series. The Straw Hat Pirates crew member I'll be checking out today is none other than Roronoa Zoro, in the attire we see him first wear in the post-time skip era. Green seems to be the overarching theme here, not just in Zoro's iconic mint green hair and sash, but also in his post-time skip attire's predominantly olive green color scheme. In terms of box size, the dimensions found here are exactly the same as it was for Grandista Nero Sanji, so Bandai Spirits has crammed the parts making up Zoro into the same space that was available for Sanji. On the front is a close-up image of the Zoro figurine as shown from the waist up, while the side box art sees a more zoomed out view that partially focuses on the details of the figure's three swords and scabbards. Moving on to the back, we now have a portrait-like image of post-time skip Zoro with his one-eyed look. Lastly is some side box art showing the full figure plus his interchangeable head option, as well as a larger view of Zoro from another angle. Let's get on with the unboxing and see what this Grandista Nero version of Roronoa Zoro has to offer. Unsurprisingly, the main protective materials used for this rather large figure is limited to the outer hard cardboard and the plastic bags the parts are placed in, due primarily to space constraints. From the looks of it, there seems to be a lot to unpack here, so as usual I'm going to fast forward this process so as to not waste your time. However, I didn't completely edit out the unwrapping process in case some of you out there, like I do, find the unwrapping process kind of soothing in an ASMR kind of way. But for those of you who don't care for these things, please skip ahead to the next section using the timestamps I have provided in the description below. Because there seems to be a lot of individual parts to cover for a figure so large in size, I better get started with the once-over of various parts making up this Grandista Nero figure of Roronoa Zoro. His interchangeable head options come in either a sullen or an angry expression version, both comprising the post-time skip one-eyed version of him. Next is his torso, with the upper half of his all-green coat unbuttoned at the chest, and at a glance it looks like there's some shading on the skin tone areas. A hollowed-out rectangular peg at the base of the torso seems to be the connection point to the lower half of the body, as we'll see later. Paint shading was fortunately extended to Zoro's green coat, whose well-sculpted folds and creases had some light applications of what looks like dark olive green on the shadow areas of the molded-in colors of the plastic. This paint shading extends to the rest of the outfit's lower half, whereby it looks like there was some minor shading done on the red sash too, with also some notable clean paintwork on the coat buttons. Shading on the back of the long coat seems more prominent, at least to the naked eye. The hole you see here at the top end of the lower half is where the earlier hollowed out peg of the top half will attach to. Meanwhile, Zoro's black boots and pants are in a flat molded-in color of black. Up next is arguably the most complex part of the Grandista Nero figure of Zoro, namely the scabbards of his three unique swords or katanas right after the time skip, i.e. Wado Ichimonji, Sandai Kitetsu, and Sushui. Of the three swords, two remain sheathed in the scabbards, while the one that Zoro wields is the Wado Ichimonji, which I'm holding in my hands now. Last but not least, we have a stabilizing piece for Zoro's right foot, which is used to help the figure stand on its own feet without toppling over. Let us now proceed to assemble post-time skip Roronoa Zoro. With the figure comprising a higher than usual part count when it comes to pre-painted figures, Assembly looks like it's going to involve more effort than usual, so I'll be doing it in real time instead of fast forwarding the process. I'll start off with what looks to me like the step that would require the most care and attention, i.e. attaching the sword scabbards to Zoro's hip area. My main concern at this stage is to prevent any accidental damage to the intricately sculpted and cleanly painted scabbards, as well as sword hilts. And as I'm attaching the scabbards to his hip, the details inherent in each scabbard clearly differentiates them from each other. A difference in details that clearly extend to the sword hilts. Once I've secured the scabbards to the hip, only then do I attach the figure's torso onto the lower half of the body, taking care, of course, not to break any of the protruding scabbards that in a way is slightly hindering my efforts to attach both halves. I'm actually using the positioning of Zoro's left hand as a guide to see if I'm attaching both the halves correctly, as that left hand should be holding onto the off-white colored scabbard which houses the Wado Ichimonji. Now what I'm doing here is just to ensure both halves are securely attached by pressing both of them together as hard as I can. With both halves now securely attached to one another, it's now time to place the unsheathed sword Wado Ichimonji, specifically its hilt, into the space on his right hand, like so. Taking care to adjust the hilt so that it's being gripped at the center. And of the two available head options, my preference is to use what is essentially Zoro's resting beach face, which I feel better matches the pose that he's adopting here. Last but not least is the stabilizing piece of plastic for the figure's right foot. It's a part that's somewhat similar to the piece used on the Sanji figurine on this Grandista Nero line of one-piece pre-painted figures, except that unlike Sanji's case, the stabilizing part works pretty well for Roronoa Zoro. In Zoro's case, the figure stands up in an extremely stable manner. For example, Grandista Nero Zoro does not wobble. Neither does he have that awful leaning issue experienced by Sanji before this. Anyway, with the figure's assembly largely completed, let's move on to the full 360-degree view of the Grandista Nero figure of Roronoa Zoro. Standing at slightly above 28 centimeters, this Roronoa Zoro figure size is in keeping with the unique selling point of the Grandista Nero lineup, namely its significantly large scale. In this version of the figure, I have used the Sullen expression head option, which I feel is more suited to his rather staid pose. I find Zoro's pose here to be fairly boring, as he's just standing straight in a rather relaxed manner, with one sword unsheathed and pointed outwards from his body. Taken at face value, especially looking at its paintwork and sculpted details, this is an incredible looking Grandista Nero figure of Zoro, with a color scheme that's pleasing to the eye. I love that paint shading has been applied to the existing molded in colors, shading that I can make out on his hair, skin tone, robe, and sash. Equally impressive are the clean paintwork and sculpted details on the three scabbards and sword hilts, as well as other painted details such as the robe buttons, Zoro's facial details, and even the stitched scar on his chest. Yet I feel the figure is lacking that oomph or something special when it comes to his pose, which for a swordsman looks extremely boring and staid. Seen here is the angry face option, which I guess doesn't look that bad with this simple pose. One way of looking at it is that the angry face head option indirectly injects some aggressiveness into what is generally a passive pose. But to me, there's a bit of disconnect between this angry expression and the relaxed posture that he's adopted, which is why I prefer Zoro's resting beach face. Before we leave this full 360-degree view of Roronoa Zoro, I would like to draw your attention to a serious gaffe on my part, which occurred during assembly. If you look closely at his red sash, I had inadvertently left it unassembled. The picture-in-picture image that's being shown here is what I should have done in the end. which interestingly still wasn't good enough as I couldn't completely connect the separate ends of the sash. Because I only found this out late in the post-editing process, which means Zoro's disconnected sash can be clearly seen throughout the rest of this video. So I'm sorry about that. Now, this close-up view of Zoro's upper half also brings to attention the high likeness factor of this Grandista Nero figure when compared to its 2D animated equivalent in the One Piece series. This is certainly another positive trait of a figure from this Bandai Spirits line of products. It also highlights a disparity in the paintwork that is perhaps not so obvious when the figure is viewed from afar. Let me explain what I mean. Now, I find the paint highlights on Zoro's hair and his skin tone shading to be exceptionally well done, considering it's only a prize figure with a more budget-friendly price point. That good paintwork exists in tandem with a less than stellar paint shading effort carried out on Zoro's green robe and red sash. So much so that the minimal paint shading over the molded in colors make for a near flat monotone look on his post-time skip outfit. And then there's the clearly painted scabbards and sword hilts, which is a significantly positive factor in this Grandista Nero figure's favor. Of course, the interchangeable head options that seem to be the norm for this Grandista Nero line of figures are certainly most welcome, notwithstanding my reservations on the suitability of some expressions to the figure's pose, as that's a matter of personal preference. Regardless, as I mentioned earlier, both the interchangeable head options do look great in that they highly resemble their anime counterparts. The close-up view of Zoro's lower half provides an even much better view of all the scabbards and sword hilts. It's an amazing piece of detail that's crucial to the identity of Roronoa Zoro that Bandai had to get right, which they did within the cost constraints of a prize figure production. And unlike the case for Grandista Nero Sanji, the stabilizing piece on Zoro's right foot works wonderfully well this time, helped in part by a more central center of gravity for the Zoro figurine. Thus, this figure is extremely stable when posed. Overall, the details of the sword's hilts and scabbards, their clean paintwork that's also seen on the robe buttons, in addition to the more visible shading on his red sash up close, all help to mitigate the more monotone look of Zoro's green robe, black trousers, and boots. My initial impressions of this Grandista Nero figure of Roronoa Zoro was an extremely favorable one, and it's a feeling that has stayed reasonably true even after the initial wow factor had waned. Yet the longer I have this Zoro figure up on my display shelf, the deeper the meh factor sinks its claws into my consciousness. In short, this figure is boring. While it looks good and is competent in the likeness department, the figure doesn't particularly invoke any emotions in me by way of character association, mainly because the figure doesn't truly encapsulate Zoro's character, which for me, rightly or wrongly, boils down to three idiosyncrasies, namely, he's a sleepyhead, and he's a man of action in a swordsman's fighting stance, or lastly, he looks like a comedic mumblehead sometimes with a terrible sense of direction. Now, this may not be a bad thing if you are, say, just a casual fan of One Piece who likes the series enough to want a Roronoa Zoro figure in your collection, yet not a super invested fan who needs the figure to truly reflect the character's idiosyncrasies. If that's the case, then this Grandista Nero Zoro figure has a decent enough paintwork and sculpted details to warrant a spot in your collection. With these diversion points in mind, I'm giving this Grandista Nero figure of Roronoa Zoro a rating of Platinum or B rank. Let me be clear in that there's much to like about this one-piece Grandista Nero figure. For its price point and the fact it's a prize figure at heart, it has good paintwork and sculpted details and a decent interchangeable head part option. I just personally find the figure's pose to be extremely meh. Well, that's another unboxing and review video from yours truly. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you have enjoyed it. Until next time, be well and be happy.